Hey everyone, it's Saoirse. Today I have got my luggage with me and I am ready to set sail on the RMS Titanic because today is the 24th anniversary of the best movie ever, Titanic. So I thought we would talk about a special book. This is A Night to Remember. It's the classic account of the final hours of the Titanic. This was written in 1955 by Walter Lord. And this is the 50th anniversary edition, so it has a nice introduction to it. I'm really excited about this one because I have always been very fascinated by the Titanic, by every single detail about it, from the building of the ship to the class issues, to every single thing that went wrong. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And then there's the whole movie, which is a 3-hour, 14-minute spectacular example of filmmaking, and I'm obsessed. So I recently watched the movie. I hadn't watched it in probably years all the way through, and I watched it the other day and I was like, oh, okay, this is all I care about now. So that's where I'm at the moment, and I'm sort of cosplaying Jack or a steerage passenger of sorts. Just bear with me, it's all I had, and I don't have hair anymore, so couldn't do, like, I would have done an Edwardian, like, really elaborate hairstyle. But this is what you get, and I think it's pretty cool. So, I'm gonna read you the back, the first paragraph on the back here. It says, first published in 1955, A Night to Remember remains the definitive classic tale of the sinking of the Titanic. Walter Lord interviewed more than 60 survivors before committing their searingly vivid recollections to his minute-by-minute account of the Titanic's fatal collision and the experiences of both passengers and crew under pressure of the unthinkable, the swift plummet into icy waters of the ship promised never to sink. The best part in that movie is when Mr. Andrews, somebody says it can't sink, and Mr. Andrews is like, she's made of iron, I assure you she can. And then he's like, it's a mathematical certainty. Rest in peace, Thomas Andrews. It's so horrible to think, you watch this movie and like you really love it, and there's a love story, and that's not real, but whatever. But then when you think this is actual history, maybe not every single detail, but that the fact that this shipwreck happened and that it was only a few days after it had set out on its maiden voyage, it's all just so wildly upsetting, but deeply fascinating, because there are just so many details and things that we still don't know and things we'll never know, because one thing I should say is that not everything should be taken as fact, even in this book. Because a lot of things that we know about the Titanic are word of mouth. They're stories that really oppose each other. Even, hours into the disaster, like when people were being rescued, there were already a bunch of stories being told about, like, the captain, for instance. I saw the captain doing this when the ship went down. I saw him here. And already there were myths being made up, because there's a lot of things that nobody really knew, but they were in a state of severe trauma and surely thought that they saw a lot of things that they didn't see, or they remembered things wrong, because the brain just goes wild in moments of terror like that. So take everything with a grain of salt, and I will mention one thing that definitely there is some controversy about. So first, the craziest thing, which this is going to knock your socks off if you don't know it. The foreword to this book goes like this. It's pretty short. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. In 1898, a struggling author named Morgan Robertson concocted a novel about a fabulous Atlantic liner, far larger than any that had ever been built. Robertson loaded his ship with rich and complacent people and then wrecked it one cold April night on an iceberg. This somehow showed the futility of everything, and in fact the book was called Futility when it appeared that year, published by the firm of M.F. Mansfield. 14 years later, a British shipping company named the White Star Line built a steamer remarkably like the one in Robertson's novel. The new liner was 66,000 tons displacement. Robertson's was 70,000. The real ship was 882.5 feet long. The fictional one was 800 feet. Both vessels were triple screw and could make 24 to 25 knots. Both could carry about 3,000 people, and both had enough lifeboats for only a fraction of this number. But then this didn't seem to matter, because both were labeled unsinkable. On April 10, 1912, the real ship left Southampton on her maiden voyage to New York. Her cargo included a priceless copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, sorry for my pronunciation, and a list of passengers collectively worth $250 million. On her way over, she too struck an iceberg and went down on a cold April night. Robertson called his ship the Titan. The White Star Line called its ship the Titanic. This is the story of her last night. What? Like, what? That is too much. How did this person feel when the Titanic went down? Did he feel like, oh, I am, what's the word when you can predict futures? Not a fortune teller. Whatever. Prescient. Whatever. Was he like, oh, I saw that coming and didn't even know that I saw that coming. I'm losing it. I just can't imagine what that felt like. There's just too many coincidences. It's so weird. So this book is cool because it's got this diagram here. It shows you all these parts of the ship and tells you what happened, like at what time in the night. And also in the back, you've got a whole list of passengers. So this shows you, there's always room for error, but it shows you the first class, second class, and third class people that we know about, and all the ones in italics were saved. And so throughout the book, when he's mentioning certain passengers, I kept flipping to the back and like hoping, oh, please let them be in italics, and then it would be like part of their group was in italics and some of them weren't, and just the amount of families that were split up, and then some of them died and some of them made it. It is beyond horrifying. Okay. I don't know what's happening to my voice. So there's so many frustrating aspects of this. When you read this book, you're just like, and when you watch the movie, you think, come on, like if you just do one thing differently. Like one of the most wild facts to me is that they had binoculars, like in the crow's nest where the people were supposed to be looking for the icebergs, and they were locked up, because just in case a passenger goes up and steals the binoculars, they're in a locked thing, and the key was left on shore. So they did not have the key to get the binoculars out, which would have allowed them definitely to see the iceberg in time. Anyway, so there's this incredible fact that, hello baby girl, that at this point in history, they now have the technology to send messages using Morse code. It's very hard for me to understand. They're tapping that little thing out on their thing. It's called a Marconi something or other, and I think it was pretty recent technology. And so the passengers were really stoked about the fact that they could send messages to people on land. And so this person who was running the, I don't know if it's telegraph, let's call it a telegraph thing. The person who's running that is just swamped with messages from passengers trying to send, like, hey, I'm on a boat, to their family on land. And he's super stressed out. So it says, all this Sunday the messages had piled up. It was enough to fray the nerves of any man working a 14-hour day at $30 a month, and Phillips was no exception. Evening came, and still the bottomless in-basket, still the petty interferences. Only an hour ago, just when he was at last in good contact with Cape Race, the Californian barged in with some messages about icebergs. She was so close, she almost blew his ears off. No wonder he snapped back, shut up, I am busy, I'm working Cape Race. they got warnings about icebergs. And I just wonder how that guy felt. Because I think he lived. No, I can't remember, but I think he did. And how did it feel to know that you told the person warning you about the iceberg to shut up? The amount of survivor's guilt that pretty much everyone must have had is beyond imagining. So yeah, ignoring iceberg warnings. Not good, don't do that. And then one of many issues was that people did not take it seriously. So if you were in a certain part of the boat, I think it hit at the, closer to the bow, and if you were on the side where the iceberg was scraping along, it would have woken you up, you would have fallen out of bed. But for everybody who's towards the stern and on the other side of the ship, it barely felt like anything. So a lot of people had a hard time accepting that anything was really wrong. And another thing that's crazy is that if they had just kept going and hit the iceberg head on, it probably would have been a better outcome. It's the fact that they turned and they couldn't get away fast enough, so the boat scraped along the whole side of the boat, scraped the iceberg that was under the water, because, icebergs are even bigger underwater than what you can see above the water. So it just punched holes along the ship, and there was no chance at that point. So it says, in another part of the ship, a locked door raised a different problem. It was jammed, and some passengers broke it down to release a man inside. At this point, a steward arrived, threatening to have everybody arrested for damaging company property when the Titanic reached New York. At 12:15, it was hard to know whether to joke or be serious, whether to chop down a door and be a hero, or chop it down and get arrested. No two people seemed to have the same reaction. That was one of the most interesting things about this book, is you're just constantly hopping back and forth between all these accounts that I'm assuming we got from the survivors that he interviewed. And they've all got different experiences, but so many of them are similar in that they didn't feel like there was any sort of a panic. Nobody was losing their minds from the beginning. It took a long time for people to start to panic at all. And that was, I'm listening to a podcast by the BBC that is people reading all of these letters that we have, either sent from when the Titanic stopped at its couple of stops before it was out in the open sea, or when it got to New York eventually, and they're written by survivors. So it's all these incredible accounts by people who either lived or died, depending on when they sent the letter. And so many of them describe how calm it was, how there was no chaos, no panic. And yeah, no, I will continue. I could really just keep talking. If you've seen me in the past few days, this is all I want to talk about. So, sorry about it. Oh yeah, so this is what I was just going to mention. This person is trying to save people from third class and take them up to the lifeboats. It was a long trip up the broad stairs to the third class lounge on C deck, across the open well deck by the second class library and into first class quarters, then down the long corridor by the surgeon's office, the private saloon, for the maids and valets of first-class passengers, finally up the grand stairway to the boat deck. Hart led his group to boat number 8, but even then the job wasn't over. As fast as he got them in, they would jump out and go inside where it was warm. So that was a huge issue. So many people would not get in or stay in the lifeboats. They just refused, because it's cold and it's scary out there. I'm swiftly losing all ability to speak. And, it's warm and well lit on the boat, and they had been told so many times at this point, it's like brainwashing, it's unsinkable. Nobody was worried about it sinking. The only person who knew, once he heard how bad the damage was, or what the exact damage was Thomas Andrews. He knew, oh, well, it's over. And it's so fascinating, because I never knew much about ships before. But hearing about the way that they had all these watertight compartments, and if you closed off the doors to them, that should stop the water from going into the next compartment, and these are on the bottom of the ship. And he knew they could stay afloat with up to 4 compartments filled with water. But the thing is, the compartments, if this is the ship, they only come up, to here, And then this is all open, so if water fills up here, it spills over into the next compartment and then to the next one. And so it just kept going like that because the boat is going down at the bow. So it's all spilling over, and once 5 compartments are full, there's no way that she can stay up. So when Thomas Andrews heard that there were 5 filling with water, he knew 100% for sure it's going down. Okay, this is one example of like a really sad moment that I just identified with. It says, Colonel Gracie rushed up with Mrs. John Murray Brown and Miss Edith Evans, 2 of the 5 unprotected ladies to whom he had offered his services on the trip. He was stopped by the line, but saw the women through. They reached boat D just as it was starting down the falls. Miss Evans turned to Miss Brown. You go first. You have children waiting at home. Quickly she helped Mrs. Brown over the rail. Then someone yelled to lower away, and at 2:05 collapsible D, the last boat of all, started down toward the sea without Edith Evans. And that just hit me so hard because she just sacrificed that spot because this woman had a husband and children. And as somebody who doesn't have a husband and children, it just makes you feel like you don't matter. Like, if you're a person on your own in this world, and maybe you don't have a family or have a lot of family, you're less important because people think that you won't be missed or that people don't need you. So that went straight to my heart. Rest in peace, Edith Evans. She was a hero. And a lot of people were heroes that night and paid the price. So this part, go into the next one, the next hero, Thomas Andrews, who, in the movie, at least, talks about how he designed the boat to have enough lifeboats, and that legally, and this is true, legally, the law stated that you did not need enough lifeboats for every passenger. You needed them for a certain percentage of passengers. And this boat was thought so unsinkable that the lifeboats were really only in people's minds as like something that they would use to ferry people to a rescue boat if the Titanic's engine like stopped or something. Basically, if she was just stuck, she was never going to sink. But if she got stuck, we'd use the lifeboats to ferry people. So why would we need enough for every passenger? Don't get me started. This is so sad. So this is somebody who sees Thomas Andrews toward the end. The smoking room was not completely empty. When a steward looked in at 2:10, he was surprised to see Thomas Andrews standing all alone in the room. Andrews' life belt lay carelessly across the green cloth top of a card table. His arms were folded over his chest. His look was stunned, all his drive and energy were gone. A moment of awed silence, and the steward timidly broke in. Aren't you going to have a try for it, Mr. Andrews? There was no answer, not even a trace that he heard. The builder of the Titanic merely stared aft. On the mahogany-paneled wall facing him hung a large painting called The Approach of the New World. Now, I don't know if that's totally true, but just that detail of the painting being called The Approach of the New World, that hit me. I don't know, somehow it's like he'd built this ship and he's looking towards this new era of technology and what people can do and how we can travel more easily. And he was, it must have been like such a glorious thing for him to have created this ship, and then just to be staring at that painting while it goes down, and to feel so much guilt for thinking like he didn't, like in the movie when he says, I'm sorry I didn't build you a better ship, Rose, something like that. And I love in the movie when he's looking at the clock and looking at his watch, and then he fixes the time, like, to the end, so precise and careful, and it's horrible. I'm never gonna get through all of these. This might have to be a longer video. Okay, so there is one incidence of a woman who would not leave her husband. There's many of those, but this is a first-class example. And it's the Strausses, Isidore and Ida. For Isidore Strauss, there was the irony of his will. A special paragraph urged Mrs. Strauss to be a little selfish, don't always think only of others. Through the years, she had been so self-sacrificing that he especially wanted her to enjoy life after he was gone. Now the very qualities he admired so much meant he could never have his wish. Excuse me. That is so sad. That she's not selfish, and to the end, she won't leave him. Yeah. I don't know. The irony of that. It's just sad. Okay, here we come to the controversy about the Californian. Because this, I was fuming when I read this, and then this is from the 50s, and we've learned some things since then, but still, I don't know if we really know. It says, 10 miles away on the Californian, Second Officer Stone and Apprentice Gibson watched the strange ship slowly disappear. She had fascinated them almost the whole watch, the way she kept firing rockets, the odd way she floated in the water. Gibson remarked that he certainly didn't think the rockets were being sent up for fun. Stone agreed. A ship is not going to fire rockets at sea for nothing. By 2 o'clock, the stranger's lights seemed very low on the horizon, and the two men felt she must be steaming away. Call the captain, Stone ordered, and tell him that the ship is disappearing in the southwest, and that she has fired altogether 8 rockets. Gibson marched into the chart room and gave the message. Captain Lord looked up sleepily from his couch. Were they all white rockets? Gibson said yes, and Lord asked the time. Gibson replied it was 2:05 by the wheelhouse clock. Lord rolled over, and Gibson went back to the bridge. At 2:20, Stone decided that the other ship was definitely gone, and at 2:40 he felt he ought to tell the captain himself. He called the news down the speaking tube and resumed studying the empty night. Now, I feel like he took a lot of liberties in writing that, because I don't know where he got that information, because I've since read and found out that a lot of people don't think that the ship that didn't help, that was nearby, was the Californian. And that poor captain of that ship died in disgrace, because there was this horrible idea that he was the captain that did not go to help the Titanic. I don't know what I believe, but I've read that it was actually another ship, this mystery ship that was less than 10 miles away and could see everything, and decided not to go help because they didn't want to go into the ice. Whereas this captain maintained that the Californian was not close enough and didn't know. So yeah, I have no idea. What do you think? I need to do more research on it. Okay, so as we know, there's the whole issue of class when it comes to the Titanic, and this was something that was a serious issue and still is in a lot of places, but this particular time in the Edwardian, late Edwardian era, we have not seen this kind of difference since then, because this was such an extreme time of disgusting wealth for some people and complete poverty for others. And yes, we have disgustingly wealthy people today, but it's just on a very different scale. It's hard to explain, but these people dropped so much money on first class tickets. It's almost unbelievable. And so anyway, a lot of people think, and it's pretty apparent from the numbers, that you would have a much better chance of surviving if you were in first class, because they might not have even let third class people on the lifeboats if there was a first class person standing there. It says, then there were the people Colonel Gracie, Lightoller, and others saw surging up from below just before the end. Until this moment, Gracie was sure the women were all off. They were so hard to find when the last boats were loading. Now he was appalled to see dozens of them suddenly appear. The statistics suggest who they were. The Titanic's casualty list included 4 of 143 first-class women, 3 of those by choice, 15 of 93 second-class women, and 81 of 179 third-class women. Not to mention the children. Except for Lorraine Allison, all 29 first and second-class children were saved, but only 23 out of 76 steerage children. Yeah. So that kind of says it all, doesn't it? And then there's this part here that says, the night was a magnificent confirmation of women and children first, yet somehow the loss rate was higher for third-class children than first-class men. Yeah. So it wasn't really women and children first. It was rich women and children first, which is just horrible. And there was sort of an obsession with wealthy people at this time. It says here, it was easier in the old days, for the Titanic was also the last stand of wealth and society and the center of public affection. In 1912, there were no movie, radio, or television stars. Sports figures were still beyond the pale, and cafe society was completely unknown. The public depended on socially prominent people for all the vicarious glamour that enriches drab lives. So, and then they say, they talk about the press, and the New York American broke the news on April 16th with a lead devoted almost entirely to John Jacob Astor. At the end, it mentioned that 1,800 other lives, 1,800 others were also lost. In the same mood, the April 18th New York Sun covered the insurance angle of the disaster. Most of the story concerned Mrs. Widener's pearls. Pretty bad. Now there's this interesting bit about chivalry. It says, but along with the prejudices, some nobler instincts also were lost. Men would go on being brave, but never again would they be brave in quite the same way. These men on the Titanic had a touch. There was something about Ben Guggenheim changing to evening dress, about Howard Case flicking his cigarette as he waved to Mrs. Graham, or even about Colonel Gracie panting along the decks, gallantly if ineffectually searching for Mrs. Candy. Today nobody could carry off these little gestures of chivalry, but they did that night. So it made me think about this question, can you have both chivalry and total equality? I don't really have an answer to that, so I was wondering what people thought. Because in a way, it makes me really sad that like a lot of people who deserve to live simply weren't allowed by one of the officers at least to get on the lifeboats just because they were men. That to me is not equality. While chivalry is a really nice idea, and it's nice to be polite to people, I wish everybody could just be polite to each other, and there wasn't this weird, we have to protect women and children because they're so pathetic mindset, which is kind of how I see it. Like they're somehow more delicate. But back then they were treated more delicately, like they couldn't do anything. Like women were just second-class citizens pretty much, even the first-class women. So that doesn't sit right with me. And I don't know how I feel about the whole thing, the women and children first thing, and the fact that somebody got shot over it, and people who desperately wanted to survive weren't allowed the chance. Yeah, it's a tough one. It is a tough one because, especially in this era, that was the thing to do, and it wasn't the law, but it was a chivalry thing. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is just a horrible description. It says, it was not only the sound that drifted over the water. All the time while collapsibles A and B were filling up and painfully struggling away from the scene, hundreds of swimmers were crying for help. Individual voices were lost in a steady, overwhelming clamor. To fireman George Kemish, tugging at his oar in Boat 9, it sounded like 100,000 fans at a British Football Cup final. To Jack Thayer, lying on the keel of Boat B, it seemed like the high-pitched hum of locusts on a midsummer night in the woods back home in Pennsylvania. Just to even try to imagine the sights and the sounds of that night, like to picture the boat going up in the water and being able to see the propellers from a lifeboat. I mean, the massive size of that ship, and watching it just slide straight into the water. I think they did a great job in the movie, but like, it's crazy that we'll never have actual footage of the real thing. Nobody had iPhones back then. So that's why like hearing people's letters that they wrote is really cool, because people were very wonderful with their letter writing back then, so they do write some great descriptions. Now we don't need to be as visually descriptive because we can just snap a picture. It's kind of sad. Oh, this is horrible. It says, somebody was receiving the Titanic's passengers on the Carpathia, which was the rescue ship. They were to get their names and then channel them to the proper dining saloon, depending on class, for medical check. So even these traumatized survivors, who have just been through the worst thing imaginable, were organized by class when they got to the rescue ship. Still organized by class. It's like, geez, guys, just give it up at that point. Like, they've been through enough. And then this right here, they're talking about headlines. And at this point, like, the world knows that the Titanic sank because of the technology we have with the Morse telegraph thing, but the Carpathia is being really silent before they get to New York. So everybody's just straight up lying and making up headlines. Hello, buddy, what are you doing? So this one right here says, all saved from Titanic after collision. All saved. I mean, you can just straight up lie. You can just print absolute crap. Or in Jack's words, absolute horse shit. Like, that's not true, and I don't know. I can't imagine the panic in the days following before everybody knew who lived and who died. You know, there's a lot of people waiting to find out if their loved ones were okay. So this is a great paragraph about the what ifs. What troubled people especially was not just the tragedy or even its needlessness, but the element of fate in it all. If the Titanic had heeded any of the 6 ice messages on Sunday, if ice conditions had been normal, if the night had been rough or moonlit, if she had seen the berg 15 seconds sooner or 15 seconds later, if she had hit the ice in any other way, if her watertight bulkheads had been 1 deck higher, if she had carried enough boats, if the Californian had only come. Had any one of these ifs turned out right, every life might have been saved. But they all went against her, a classic Greek tragedy. And that's the thing that I keep thinking about, is just, why can't we go back and just make one of those things right? Of course, a lot changed after this, and there were all sorts of inquisitions and such about who was at fault, and after that, there was simply no way that a ship would be allowed to carry less lifeboats than the amount of people. Which is good, you know, there was some change made, but the fact that it had to happen that way is awful. On a slightly positive note, 3 dogs did survive the sinking. 2 Pomeranians and a Pekingese. Sadly, there were a lot of other animals that didn't make it, but 3 dogs were managed to be smuggled by their owners under coats, and they survived, which I think is incredible. So that's all I'm going to say about that for now, and I'm going to go finish watching the movie another time, because I've just gotten to the part where the boat's about to sink. Isn't that a terrible thing? You know, you've already watched, like, what, an hour and a half, 2 hours, and you still have so much left, and you're, like, riding high on Jack and Rose kissing for the first time, and it's so romantic, and then you remember, oh, this is all about to go south. It's so depressing and so beautiful. Please let me know if you recommend any Titanic podcasts, books, movies, anything, because I want to consume all of it. I am so interested. So thank you very much for watching, and you know what? Go watch the Titanic now, because I always call it the Titanic. It's just Titanic, the film. Go watch it, because today is the anniversary, and you know, next year is the 110th anniversary of the sinking of the ship, and it'll be the 25th anniversary of the movie, so that'll be an exciting time. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time. We'll stay forever this way. You are safe in my heart, and my heart will